We are not alone. You are watching Contact TV with your hosts, Leslie Mitchell-Clark
and Wes Roberts,
exploring ufology, metaphysics, and beyond with the world's foremost experts.
One.
And welcome everyone to another episode of Contact TV. And as always, I am your hostess. People don't like that word anymore, but I kind of like it. I'm your hostess, Leslie Mitchell-Clark, and I am joined, as always, by your co-host.
It is Wes Roberts here. Hello.
That is right. And we are pretty darn tootin' excited tonight because we are welcoming back to Contact TV. Well, I don't think that there's any question that this gentleman is one of our most favorite guests. And he always brings exciting, thought-provoking, and also positive information for us from his really fascinating life experience. Now, I'm not going to belabor the show by going into a lot of history that probably many of you are already aware of, but Captain Randy Cramer is a super soldier. He was drafted into the secret space program as a teenager and went on his mission 20 and back and was rebooted to what would have been his present day life. And he has spent many years quantifying, understanding, processing these experiences. And he is probably, without question, the world's leading authority right now on the secret space program in all of its diverse guises. So without further ado, we welcome back to Contact TV our friend Randy Cramer. Welcome back, Randy.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. What's happening? What's happening with you? How are you guys doing?
Oh, well, thank God we're in Canada. That's all I can say. I mean, every day, you know, as a expatriate American, every day I wake up to a new horror show of stupidity. And it is now taken on completely surreal proportions. You know, we don't understand the Canadian people. I can't speak for all Canadian people, obviously, but I think the general thought up here is no one can really fully understand how wearing a face mask to protect others and yourself has become a right-wing, alt-right political issue, and people are dying by the boatload. So, you know,
so I'm going to go ahead and I'll say, since you brought it up, I'll comment a little bit on that. And I know that some people are going to get mad at what I say. And I'm just going to pre-state what I'm going to state for boo-hoo. I'm sorry I made you mad by telling you the truth if you didn't want to hear it. And I otherwise couldn't give a fuck about what people think about what I have to say or who I am or what they think my opinions, political stances, or so forth are. But I will state this as clearly as I can. There has been a deeply, heavily financed covert military intelligence psychological operation that has been placed upon the American people, specifically hitting the social political right end of the spectrum, which is mostly coming out of Russian intelligence, Chinese intelligence, Saudi intelligence, Mossad, and German intelligence. And it started about, where are we at now? 12 years ago. Started about 12 years ago, maybe 15. They started kind of this concerted effort to get these little hooks of information into a group of people to lead them down a path of afactual confusion. And it kind of started with birtherism, started with people attacking Barack Obama for not being an American citizen, saying he was a Kenyan Muslim or whatever. So, and let me just solve that conversation for people who want to have a debate about it. Immigration law, as the statutes stand, a person who is born from an American citizen's womb anywhere in the world is still an American citizen. So if I make an example and say Jane Doe is pregnant and she's on vacation in China and she has her baby in China, does that make her baby not an American citizen? No, it absolutely does not. Her child will still be an American citizen. There may be dual citizenship issues that child may have to face when they turn 18, which is often when you get these immigration sort of birth laws across international lines, what sort of happens if you're a citizen of one country, your mother's a citizen of that country, and you're born somewhere else, you usually will end up with some double citizenship options down the road for you to choose from. But if your mother's an American citizen, you're an American citizen. And so it doesn't matter where he was born. His mother was an American citizen who was born here as well. And doesn't matter whether she had him in Hawaii or whether she had him in Kenya or who his father is, it doesn't matter. He's still an American citizen. That's the law. Ask an immigration lawyer or someone who actually understands that and they'll straighten it out for you. But that started this sort of, and people are going to hate, some people are going to hate me when I say this too. And the reason that they decided that it was going to be a psychological operation that they were going to play on the political right is because it turns out that the social political right is easy to manipulate because they already believe things that are ridiculous, like virgin births and that Jesus died for their sins and other things that religious magical thinking enables people to be easily fooled, conned by carpetbaggers and snake oil salesmen.
Yeah.
Now, I don't say that. I'm also going to qualify this. I don't say that as an outsider. Okay. In fact, when people ask me to comment on religious extremism or religious racial extremism or what we consider to be sort of the white evangelical white supremacist movement, I can speak to that for hours and hours and hours and hours, and not because I'm someone who read a lot of books, but because I was born and raised in a white evangelical white supremacist family. So when I talk about understanding the psychology, the indoctrination, the programming, the vulnerabilities, the hatred, the fear, this is not something that I read a lot about or I learned about in a classroom. This is something I learned about at home. This is something I learned about in church. A lot of it I learned in church. A lot of it I learned at Saturday barbecues with other people from that church and from the same community, listening to the things that they would say, listening to their racial biases, their racial fear and their hatred, right? Talking about, you know, and these are people who are not, and these kind of supremacists that I was growing up with were not the kind of like gun-toting, you know, rebel flag waving, you know, type. They were the type that if you asked them openly and publicly what they felt about, you know, people of other races, they would speak, oh, well, you got to respect everybody. Everybody is God's children. That's what they'd say publicly. But in private, with just people in the family or just people from church, and then you start talking about, yeah, but, you know, we know that white people are better and we're the superior, you know, bunch because God chose us and all stuff. They're totally in agreement with that. So there's those who are really vocal about their particular theocratic supremacy. And theocracy is also something that runs deep in the veins of these people. These are people who, at the very core of what they believe, they want to say that they're patriots, they want to say they believe in the Constitution, but they don't because they're theocrats. They think that the government should be run by Christian men and women who promote law as Christians and who can, you know, rule from the books of law in the Bible. There are theocrats who have absolutely spoken publicly and written about how they would love to have judges in the United States of America be able to make judgments from the book of Leviticus. Anyone who doesn't understand why that's a problem needs to sit down and read the book of Leviticus. Okay, because this is some of the most hardline, you know, Old Testament law, stonings and, you know, for minor things that shouldn't necessarily get you stoned to death and other crimes as far as, I mean, a woman could be punished under Leviticus law for disobeying her husband. You know, we could have returns to sort of, you know, fascist, theocratic, patriarchal monstrosism because of sort of this core belief of white evangelical theocratic supremacists. And again, I grew up with these people. I was indoctrinated just like them. When I was a teenager, I talked just like them. I believed the same things that they believed. I had the same hatred and fear for people who were the other from, you know, what my particular social group was supposed to be, and the way we felt fearful and angry and terrified and hateful at things that were not like us, because I was raised to do that. I was indoctrinated to do that. And it, luckily for me, changed when I just kind of started to have friends that weren't that crazy. And they were nice enough to sit me down and say, you know, this is a little crazy and it's a little messed up. And you kind of have to look at the history of, you know, racial hatred and violence and supremacy, and really ask yourself whether these are values that you align yourself with. And so it was someone who actually got me to just, instead of accepting the dualistic indoctrination that I was getting, to actually go, oh, do I actually believe that? Do I actually believe that we should, you know, like subjugate one particular group over the other? Should we really actually elevate one group of people over another? And what are the consequences of that? What are the dangers of that? What's the history of that? And so when you look at the history just in America of slavery, lynchings in the, you know, sort of post-Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws, the civil rights movement, there has been a systemic attempt to oppress non-white people by white people. Now, not everybody, and not every white person is a racist, supremacist, jackbooted, you know, oppressor. That's not true. Definitely not true. But there has been a systemic system of those people being in power for a very, very long time. And what you find out is when all of a sudden those people realize they may have to share, they may actually have to have a system that's more equal. They may actually have to live in a system of equality. Well, that's terrifying to them. That's absolutely terrifying to them. So when they start railing about, you know, their heritage and their history and so forth, what they're really railing on is the fact that they might just have to accept that they're not the most important person in the room, and that they might have to share equality with other people, and they might actually have to accept that someone isn't a dirty, filthy murderer or rapist because of their skin color. Or, you know, is automatically a drug addict or a pimp or a prostitute or a stripper or, you know, a gang member because they happen to be of a certain racial group. And I've been with people, groups of white people who, friends of mine, who I love to pieces, you know, and watch them make snap judgments about other people from other colored racial groups because they're dressed differently, they're behaving differently, they're listening to different music, and not check themselves and go, oh, wait, I just had a reactive bias thing happen. I didn't stop to think about what was happening. I just automatically saw something that triggered a fear response or an anger response or a disgust response or a hate response. There's all these different responses that sort of racial bias can come from. It's not purely hatred, right? There are other things that, and a lot of it's fear. A lot of it's just people who are terrified. They don't necessarily start hating people of other racial distinctions. They start by being afraid of them. And part of that fear is put into them by the people that they grew up with and by their family members and by their church members, telling them stories, whether true or not. Most of them are mostly urban legends that were passed from one person to another, or extreme cases where something happened and a person of color was the victimizer, and that makes every person of color, you know, a dangerous criminal, thug, gangster, woman, you know, dangerous person, which it does not at all. In fact, I would take this, let's just take this to the intergalactic level, right? When you're talking about other species, there is no other species that is good or evil. There's no such thing. There is no other species that is all saintly and good and moral and ethical, and other species who are just all, you know, criminal, terrible, you know, rapist abusers. It's not true. there may be species who are run by one or other of those majorities. But if you think that that means that every single member of that species falls under this pyramid that makes them the same, it's not true any more than that's true here, right? We have a lot of different people on this planet who have a lot of different points of view, who have a lot of different viewpoints on what ethics, morals, proper behavior is. And you have some people who are very good, and you have some people who are very horrible. So to blanketly say to human beings, oh, those human fucking Terran monkeys, they're all bad. No, that's not true. Oh, well, they're fine. They're all good. No, that's not true either. And so that's never true of any species. Well, that's never true of any racial group. It's never of any true economic group. If you want to break this down into some sort of classism, which a lot of it becomes classism too, where it's people who are affluent, who are terrified of people who are in poverty, who they think want to take their affluency away from them, when really they just want to not starve, to not, be able to go to the doctor, and to not be without shelter. So, most of what the people really want are simple things. They don't want to take all the billionaires' mansions and yachts away. They would just like the fair shake that they deserve as citizens of the planet and the society that we live in that thrives because of all of the things that are in place that allow the system and our civilization to thrive, and the worker base that we have that allows it to thrive. If we didn't have a worker labor base that was enabled to make that thrive, it wouldn't thrive. So the labor movement was about the same thing. It was about, let's just have a fair shake. Hey, working 7 days a week, 16 hours a day seems a little unfair. That's the basis of the labor movement. So the idea that every poor person, or that every person on the left who's protesting right now is a Marxist anarchist that wants to take down America and hates America is completely not true. There are some anarchist extremists who have been, involved in some of the protests, some tiny number. But you also have right-wing extremists who have dressed up pretending to be Antifa members with Molotov cocktails and pipe bombs to blow people up, like the guys that got arrested, the Boogaloo Boys that got arrested in Vegas. So there is no, if you get caught in the self-righteous notion that your side is the only side that has morals and ethics, and the other side must be completely bankrupt of morals and ethics. Well, the minute you get taught, you convince yourself of that, you've convinced yourself, like every fascist system, every extremist group has ever taught their people to believe that it's okay to kill these people now because they're completely ethically, morally inferior to you, and genetically inferior to you, spiritually inferior to you, whatever that, that creation of superiority, inferiority, because you can't have superiority without inferiority, right? You can't be the superior one or have supremacy without other people being inferior. This is one of the things that when I was a teenager that really flipped it around. It was like, wait a minute, it's not so much that I have a hard time thinking about my own superiority as a person, because we all have a sense of ego about ourselves. I'm like, oh, I'm pretty good. Like everyone has a certain sense of that part of themselves that they have to, that goes up and down as they grow up or grow older, depending on how they're treated and how they interact with the world. But it's when you allow yourself to think that other people are inferior, and therefore somehow because they're inferior, they're not deserving of respectful, decent treatment. And it's okay to therefore disrespect them, beat them up, use excessive force when you're arresting them so that you kill them in the process and then go, oops, he resisted arrest and I was too rough and I killed him. All of that comes from the sense that you can place these people as an inferior. And by saying that they're inferior, you devalue them and you give yourself and your social group permission to do them harm.
Yes.
The Nazis, calling poor Jews vermin wasn't an accident. It wasn't just some guy that said, let's call them vermin. I mean, it was a conscious decision to call them vermin, to compare them to rats, so that you could justify the extermination of them, right? So anytime you catch people using that type of terminology, taking a position of superiority and attacking the other side as being morally and ethically inferior, you're setting people up psychologically to do harm and to be willing to, kill members of this other side.
Absolutely.
Even though, as an American, let's just talk about us as American citizens. I know you're Canadian, but I have plenty of people who are going to hear this who are American citizens.
I'm from New York City, Randy.
Oh, that's right. You're an
I have
expat.
dual citizenship. My kids have dual citizenship.
That's right.
I'm here. I live in Canada by choice because of these rumblings that have gone on for so many years. But I know you wanted to just finish a point, but before we get going any further, I just wanted to ask you, do you feel, Randy, that these processes, these kinds of processes that we go through as a society seemingly over and over again, are patterns that perhaps were imprinted upon us by the progenitor races, if you accept that kind of idea?
Two things. I would say that some of that is from a genetic, psycho-spiritual history of repetition. Some of it is also active operations by people who are currently in power who are trying to get those cycles to repeat. Because when we see communities, civic governments change those policies and change those patterns as a social political structure, you see communities change too. You see people's responses to it change too. So, you could go to a lot of places in the world where people have been hammering division, supremacy, inferiority for decades, centuries. But because they've been still getting hit hard with it in the last century, they're going to be locked into those belief patterns. You go to some of the countries where they've taken strong, active, proactive social political stances on not doing that. Saying, you know what? We're going to do the opposite of that. We're going to say everybody needs to be treated like a fair citizen, even immigrants, right? You can't just mistreat people because they're not legal citizens and say, well, we're going to say they're inferior and we can treat them poorly because they're from another country, they're immigrants. That's also an ethical, moral, slippery slope. But countries who have said, no, everyone's going to get a fair treatment. Everyone who is sick has to go into the doctor, the hospital will get treated, and we won't send them a bill. We're going to actually have laws and policies that men and women have to be paid fairly. We're actually going to have laws and policies that say that, no, you can't just fire a person because of their skin color or sexual orientation or a social political opinion. Like, they level the playing field and playing field in fairness, and the people behave differently, having lived under those systems for decades. Having been to Europe and having spent some time in Holland, I can tell you that there are places where they've done it differently and they have a different social political intent, and they set out a different pattern for people by doing that. And that creates a different social fabric, and that creates a different way that the community blossoms and orients itself towards functioning with each other and themselves. And families are still the most important thing, but then everyone accepts that everybody's family is the most important thing. Right. And your family isn't inferior or superior because of your skin color or where you come from or your social station or your economic status. Everybody's families are important. And because everybody's families are important, intolerance isn't tolerated. And so we've gotten to a place where intolerance is being encouraged by some people. We're in a place where division is being encouraged. We've got a place where extremity is being encouraged. Supremacy is being encouraged. And that's creating a dangerous civil war mindset. Now, that's intentional by these psychological operations from these intelligence agencies who have been playing this game back on the United States. And to be fair, this is exactly the kind of thing that the United States military intelligence apparatus has been doing to other countries for the last 3/4 of a century. Certainly post-World War II, the CIA's #1 functioning policy was to destabilize governments that we didn't think were friendly to us through recognizing which left and right extremities could be propagandized and fueled with more information, more propaganda, money, and guns, and that could topple governments by essentially creating extremist social political movements in those other countries. Well, the international community of people who decided that a weaker America was good for them realized that they could do the same thing, that we had, because of our own internal divisions that had been fomented by military intelligence projects and a corporate structure, let's just be honest, that a lot of this comes from the corporate structure, that we created our own destabilized system, that the people who wanted to create a less stable fabric of society so that Americans were so more easily controlled, well, that just made it that much easier for these other countries to use the exact same psychological operations on a weakened American mindset that had been de-educated and filled with so much propaganda from the social psychological demographic of whichever side or place in the banner of left to right that they identified with, to make us vulnerable to that. And so they've done an golf clap to those who have played the psychological operation. It's been very effective. They've done very well. It's been an incredible success for them. But it is going to mean that train has now been set into motion, that it's not stopping. There's no brakes on this train at this point. Whatever place we were in the last decade where we could have intervened socially, politically, and brought the extremes back together into a center and strengthened up the American experiment, that's done.
Yeah.
We've passed that point. So the train is full speed ahead, and we will continue to see various forms of civil disruption, domestic terrorism, and actions that look more and more and more like a heating up civil war conflict as we continue to go down the road with this. That's not stopping. That's happening. I'm not in favor of that. Let me be perfectly clear. As an American, I know that the first time that we had a civil war nearly destroyed us, and it was a really bad idea. And having another one is a really bad idea and can do a tremendous amount of damage to the American experiment that no true patriotic American should want to see. And for those who make the argument that the system in this country has become so corrupt that it has to be broken down and rebuilt, let's look around the world at some of the places in which systems were felt to be so corrupt that they had to be broken down and rebuilt, and ask ourselves how many of those systems have been rebuilt in the last half century. And most of them have not. Afghanistan, Kabul, Afghanistan, people should Google this if they don't believe me. Google, photographs, Kabul, Afghanistan, 1955, 1954, 1950. And you can see paved streets with phone wires and power lines and cars, modern construction. Kabul was a city that was becoming civilized and that was fully engaged and functioning with the rest of the world as a civilized country. A lot of rural areas, sure. And it has never come back from the devastation that it suffered in the mid-20th century. Afghanistan has never come back from that. They're a third world country. They're still a third world country. The getting rid of Saddam Hussein, which I'm not saying he was a good person. He was a terrible, horrible tyrant. But getting rid of him created a vacuum space for which the Islamic State could thrive and could exist. Couldn't thrive and exist as long as, you know, he was oppressing Islamic extremists, which he was. He was a secularist. He was not an Islamic extremist in any way, shape, or form, and he was oppressing them. Not saying that that's necessarily awesome, but he was keeping the militants from going crazy. And by creating that vacuum, Islamic fundamental militantism, Islamic fundamental militantism has, you know, thrived in that part of the world. And anyone who's seen some pictures recently of Iraq, they have not recovered. Okay, you can also go back and look at pictures from the 80s when Saddam Hussein was in power, and paved streets, power lines, cars, functioning civilization. And now it is continues to be a third world war zone that continues to attempt to rebuild its political structure and continues to fail every time, because when you create something out of nothing, it's weak. It's very weak. And so trying to recreate a functioning civilization out of these ashes when there are other forces that are very strong is making it impossible for those countries to rebuild themselves. So I would suggest to anybody who thinks that by destroying the functional operating governmental system that we have, that we'll somehow be able to replace it with something that's better, you don't understand military tactics and math too well. If we destroy the system that we have, it's going to take a really long time to build it back up to something that's functioning and civilized, which is why we should always want to fix this problematic system that we have, which is why we have a constitution that guarantees us the right to redress grievances and have civil protests, and to vote for people that we think will make proper change. And if you don't like the people that are running, then run. Become the person who's going to, you know, in the state legislature or in, you know, the federal system, to make the vote to make the system a better place. But wanting to destroy it militarily with militantism is not going to get anybody where they want to go. Whatever imagination they have that they think they're going to get out of that scenario is not what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So we're steam full ahead of that. But since that's a perfect segue into, let's just talk about the bigger picture for a second, okay? Because we step back from this. This is like focusing on something going, oh my God, this is a terrible mess. But if we step back, we're in the middle of a process. Stage one of this process was one or more viral pandemics. And without going into too much detail, I will say that there are more viruses than just the single coronavirus that we're dealing with. Not so far, they're not calling it anything else. They're not saying, oh, and there's this other virus and there's this other virus, or really talking about how many, you know, strains of mutation may make the virus different. But there's also some evidence from some people I've spoken to, that we're also dealing with a bacterial agent that is causing symptoms and making people sick. So if that's the case, we're not just talking about one agent. We're talking about multiple biological agents that can be viral and or bacterial, that may all be being labeled the same thing, but is not the same thing. One came out of China. There's another one in Brazil and another one in Africa, that we're talking about 3 major potential global pandemic viruses. Then again, there's some weird bacterial infection that's coming into play. And we just had a case, 2 kids got the bubonic plague in Mongolia. One of them died. I was told that these were weaponized forms of the bubonic plague, and that we may end up getting a side of plague with our plague. But that's, again, step back. That was just step 1. Step 2 was the civil disruption phase, which we actually thought was going to happen a little differently, but it seemed to organically occur out of the death of George Floyd, which was a little different than what we were expecting, but it's still playing into everybody's games the same way. So it doesn't really matter. And as the civil disruption phase heats up and boils, we're going to enter into stage 3. Stage 3 is when one or more of the following military superpowers around the world decide that we're internally weak enough to take a shot. It's the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and the North Koreans. Anyone who's been paying attention, following along in the news, we're having lots of saber rattling with all of these people for months now. The Russians have been testing our airspace multiple times a week. So they're sending fighters and bombers, over Alaska to like bump into our airspace and see how long it takes us to respond, how many fighters, how many bombers do we respond with, how, what sort of happens when they do that. So they're just testing. The Chinese have been really saber rattling and threatening in the South China Sea. We've sent multiple carrier groups to the South China Sea. The Iranians have, rammed naval ships with, smaller, gunboats. They also have just built a mock-up aircraft carrier for them to start shooting at and taking target practice at. It's like a slightly smaller scale than an actual U.S. aircraft carrier, but it's a mock-up of exactly what a U.S. aircraft carrier looks like, other than it being slightly smaller scale, which I'm not sure what the point of that is, making it a smaller target, but it's up to them, not me. North Koreans have blown up the building that they used to have negotiations with the South Koreans with, and saying, we're going to come for you, and making lots of mean militant threats. We just kicked out Chinese consulate personnel in Dallas, I want to say it is, and then they went out into the courtyard and started burning massive piles of documents before they all have to leave. As a response, China has kicked out U.S. consulate personnel from a city in China. We also have the San Francisco consulate, Chinese consulate, which is supposedly harboring someone who may have some scientists that we actually have been try to arrest, that we, a Chinese scientist who is spying for them, that we would like very much to arrest, but he's hiding out in the embassy there, and they're protecting him. So that's getting very, very heated up. I should mention also the incident that happened on the Indian border with the Indian Army, where there's this demilitarized zone in this sort of disputed area along the border of China and India. And so the soldiers aren't allowed rifles or pistols. So when Chinese apparently ambushed the Indian Army soldiers, they were using clubs and pieces of wood wrapped with barbed wire and nails hammered through them. And the Indian Army apparently had to do the same thing, had to improvise a bunch of hand-to-hand melee weapons made out of, wood clubs and barbed wire and nails. And they beat the crap out of each other with those for a while, and a number of soldiers died. And so that's so essentially New Delhi, instead of aiming its missiles at Pakistan is now aiming its missiles at China, because let's not forget that India is in the nuclear club, so they also have atomic weapons. So this is all getting crazy hot at the moment. And as we continue to look internally weak because of our social political structure and lack of competent leadership, which makes us look incredibly weak to the international community, one or more of these powers will do something and challenge us to be like, okay, you want to take on the internal, clusterfuck you're having at the moment, and an international conflict with someone in a war that you can't probably win right now? Is that what you want to do? And we're going to be challenged to engage militarily with one or more of these superpowers. And that's going to happen. These are things that a intelligent tactician who can look at all of these pieces in play would tell you the same thing I'm telling you. This is inevitable. You can't pump the brakes on this anymore. We can't pump the brakes and make the virus go away. it's not happening, right? Even if everybody put on their PPE and was social distancing, like the virus itself still has this curve of behavior that comes in phases, and we haven't even hit phase 2 yet. Phase 2 isn't going to come biologically until September. What we're seeing right now is just an ignorance of trying to flatten the curve. And so the new spike that we're seeing isn't a second curve or a second wave. It's the first curve. It's the first wave. We didn't really do anything to stop it, and it kind of went up and then wiggled like this for, oh, here, so you can see my hand, kind of went up and then wiggled like this for a while, and now it's shooting up again. That's not a second wave. We never flattened the curve the first time. We just did a bunch of stuff that didn't try to flatten it so that it eventually is going to spike up again. So we're seeing surges in cases, and in a few weeks, the surges in deaths will follow as the curve shows, right? Because of the incubation rate and how long it takes once people are infected for them to die. So we're going to see the fatalities start to spike again in a few weeks, and then we're going to see another phase in September, and then another one probably January is when the third roll sort of comes with that. That's not stopping. The people on both sides of the civil disruption phase are not going home. They're not rolling up they're not saying, oh, we're done, I'm over it, let's go home. Everybody on all sides wants to make this their stand. So that's not stopping. The power play that these other countries want to play, want to engage in, and what is financially, sociologically, militarily important for them. And without going into a lot of details, these are all, with the exception of the Iranians, actually, this is an interesting comparison. When you have to look at the militant imperial designs of the Russians, the Chinese, and the North Koreans, which are hugely imperial militant designs and desires. The Iranians actually look the least imperial and the least militant of the group. And but the Chinese, Xi Jinping just got confronted by a reporter at a press conference, it's like days ago, who had gotten a video of these Uyghur Muslims, which is a Chinese minority that's being oppressed and thrown into prison camps currently. He had the video of this train platform with all of these Uyghur Muslims on their knees, hands bound, blindfolded, hoods over their heads, being loaded onto trains. Anyone who knows a little bit of history should be deeply concerned about people being loaded onto trains with, you know, hands bound and hoods over their heads to what we know are to forced labor camps and probably also death camps. Chinese are desperately needing to control population issues for themselves. And so to their leadership, it's just a math issue. It's like, well, we got to have less people. So what minority do we want to go after to get rid of? How many old people can we, you know, kill with the coronavirus? You know, this is all their design there. So their imperial designs, their fascist designs, their extermination of their populist designs are pretty severe. North Korea is just insane, just batshit insane. So you can't rely that there's any sanity other than, you know, must be strong, you know, guerrilla kind of, you know, strength, weakness thinking, very, very primitive military sort of tactical understanding of the world that they live in, but incredibly dangerous because of what they have. Ultimately not a threat that can't be crushed, but still dangerous to start, you know, shooting off rockets and missiles and things that they can do. The Russians, let's make no mistake, they never gave up their imperial notions just because the Soviet Union collapsed, right? That was essentially just like, well, we got to go do things a little differently now. And turn themselves into essentially a multi-tiered criminal gas and oil corporation. It's essentially what Russia is. It's a gas station based on oligarchs, corrupt oligarchs and mobsters. And so they know that whatever they do is just about money, but they're the biggest gangster country on the planet right now, are the Russians. And the Iranians are being threatened, badly threatened by the Israelis. The Israelis want to wipe out Iran. They want to destroy them. They want to absolutely wipe Iran off the face of the map. And so Iran has to take some sort of a defensive stance against them and against us, as long as we continue to be allies with the Israelis. And so, interestingly enough, they're the least militant, least imperial of this bunch, but all of this is going to be a clusterfuck and it's going to be crazy. So all of this is inevitable. No one's pumping the brakes. The brake lines have been cut on all of these things. Doesn't matter who gets elected in November. It's not stopping. It's not going to end, right? It's not going to, all of a sudden, everybody's going to go, oh, protests are going to stop, and the right-wing extremists are going to stop, and the militant imperialists are going to stop. No, it's not happening. So we're going full speed ahead. Stage 1 was pandemic. Stage 2, civil disruption. Stage 3, global militarized conflict with one or more military superpowers, as I just described. Stage 3. Now, once we are in a state of global weakness, let's be perfectly clear. That's a state of global weakness. The entire globe will be economically, sociologically, and militarily weak, because we're all going to be busy throwing rocks and bottles at each other. That's when stage 4 happens. That's when the alien invasion happens. Now, let's talk about the alien invasion for a second. Some people would like to say that this is going to be a hoax event. I may have even poorly chosen to use that word in the past. But if it's real aliens and real people die, it's not really a hoax, is it? But the question becomes, then what is it? How real is it? How not real is it? Well, let me throw a hammer, a monkey wrench into this, and maybe even to some things I've said before about this, which, of the subjects that I have been given liberty to speak about, for the most part, I am given a broad, wide latitude in what I want to say, how I want to say it, and what topics and what facts I want to address. This topic, I have had to continue to converse with my brigadier and the command staff about talking points. And as they understand certain things and as certain things move along, I get instructed on which talking points I can talk about. So what I may have said in the past reflects talking points which I was allowed to speak about at that time. Talking points that I'm talking about today are updated talking points based on updated information and the ability to speak more clearly, or in some cases more vaguely, on what's happening and how it's going to happen. So let's just say that there's a scenario where, say there's a number of possible scenarios here. Let's say scenario A is somebody wants to orchestrate a orchestrated scripted event, which again isn't the same as a hoax, in order to shift social, military, governmental power. Now, depending on who that is, depending on who's at the reins of that, may depend a tremendous amount on what happens after that. So whether we want to say, oversimplify and say, white hats are in charge of that, maybe that could go well. Black hats are in charge of that, maybe it could go very badly. So that's really two possibilities. That's like an A1 and an A2. Let's say that we have another possibility, which is that we've known for some time that an invasion was imminent by a hostile insectoid species, which essentially are like driver ants. And if we want to talk about insects for just a second, we can talk about ant species on planet Earth, just regular ants running around. Most ants collect food, bits and stuff. There's some ants that harvest glucogen from aphids. They're like herders. There's some ants that clear out vegetation. They're like farmers. Some are like scavengers. And there are also something called driver ants. Driver ants are carnivorous ants that have been known to take down unattended infants and tethered horses. These are little ants, little teeny ants. There's enough of them, and they're vicious enough, and they're predatory enough that if a horse was tied up, and they come in swarms of tens of thousands, can take down that whole horse and pick it away one little piece at a time until it's bones. So most insectoid species, as we understand them in the intergalactic community, reflect actually a similar evolutionary path where most of them are not super hostile, aggressive, carnivorous driver ants. Most of the insectoid species that we run into are more like the scavengers or the builders or the designers or farmers or herders. Well, what if we actually ran into an actual insectoid species that was viciously carnivorous and aggressive? Bugquistadors, conquering bugs. What if we ran into that? And what if we knew that they were making a plan to come visit us? Would you want to tell people that an invasion was coming? Or would you want to tell them that a hoax invasion was coming? Or would you want them to believe whatever they want to believe? Because it's not really going to matter when it happens. But people's perspectives of what's happening may help guide their own personal process for survival or cooperation. So I'm going to make some people mad right now. And I'm going to say it's one of those. And there's going to be a lot of twists and turns and surprises as that plays out, of which are not talking points on the current list that I have to discuss with, for good reasons, which I can't tell you either. But as we go through this process, it's going to get worse before it gets better in that sense, right? We're going through, pandemic pains, civil disruption pains. We're going to be in World War IV pains. And then we're going to have alien invasion pain in the butt. But, there's a big but. That's only Act 4. This is a 5-act Shakespearean play. Act 5 is the most important one. And this may be driven by forces that are bigger than anything that I could ever try to describe or talk about. They're cosmic forces that have influence over the development and the evolution of lesser species, sorry, my phone's ringing. Hold on. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to interrupt you ever so briefly. We can
Yeah.
put a hold on this next thought, or we can keep going because we've got about 5 to 10 minutes. Whatever you like.
I can do it super quick. This is
Okay.
the good part. So the good part is, however this is supposed to happen, at some point, friends are going to come show up and help. We're going to be able to shoo away the bad aliens. And then we get a post-disclosure Reconstruction moment out of this. That's where it's all going to be okay. And if I can paint any kind of a silver lining to all of this, it's that it's going to be okay, because the Reconstruction is going to be okay. Now, I realize if I was at the beginning of World War II with the prescience of knowing what was going to happen through the war, into the war, post-war Reconstruction, and everyone's terrified about the war, and oh my God, this is happening, oh, we're going to the Nazis, what are we going to do? And say, I know this is going to suck for a few years, but it's going to be okay. You know, there's going to be it's going to end, the terrible, horrible threat will not exist, and we will have a post-war Reconstruction that will socially, economically be a boom that we have not ever experienced, and it's all going to be okay. Doesn't mean what we're going through right now doesn't suck. Doesn't mean it's not going to suck more. Doesn't mean that people are going to die, because they're dying right now, and more people are going to die, and that's terrible. I have personal family members who are dead from coronavirus. So I have, you know, extended family that has already been, you know, hashed off as fatalities with phase 1. So there's going to be plenty of that. And I wish that there was a nicer way that this could all go down. But because of the inevitability of stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, kind of is what makes stage 4 the inevitable stage 4 that it is. There could have been an opportunity for us to do this the nice way, if we had found a way to avoid these first 3 stages. But we didn't. We didn't avoid these first 3 stages. We didn't take the social, political, economic steps to create and fundamentally support our society and our social structure so that these things didn't happen. But we didn't. So they happened. So this is going to happen. But so is this. 5's also going to happen. And that post-Reconstruction is going to be when the trade embargo goes down, the travel embargo goes down, the information embargo goes down, and the exchange programs begin. The exchange programs are going to be extraterrestrial personnel who are going to come visit us to help share information with us. And we're going to send a whole lot of people out there to other places. And they're going to go there for 4 or 5 years. And they're going to study what those like on those other planets and how they do their economy works, how their social structure works, how their political structures work, how their technological systems work, how their medical systems work. And they're going to come back with a whole bunch of examples of how other people have done it right. And that exchange of information is going to give us the opportunity to finally do things right, so that we can be a type 1 civilization. So if we as an entire planet, not just you and me, but like everybody as an entire planet, had chosen decades ago to not be selfish, petty, angry, baby little monkeys, then we could have done this the nice way. We could have been introduced to the intergalactic community in a more positive functioning manner that didn't have to involve all this mayhem. But because all this other mayhem was inevitable, that makes an invasion scenario inevitable. Whether it is truly because of one kind of social, political weakness or another, depending on who's making it happen, requesting it to happen, encouraging it to happen, making us vulnerable so that it becomes just an open door that's going to happen anyway. That train's going down the line and it's not stopping. So I encourage people to always be safe, be good to each other. That means everybody, right? This is the time when it's really the best time to be good to people that we disagree with. And it's the best time to be good to people that we think might be on the opposite side of a discussion with us. Because otherwise we're going to get into that place of division, supremacy, inferiority, and justify harming and killing one another because we don't want to be nice to each other. So being safe, being good to each other, and staying very grounded and very centered is what's going to be important here. Because it's going to happen. It's happening.
Okay.
You can't pray it away, can't wish it away, can't vote it away. Like, it's just happening. So
Okay.
I want everyone to be safe and understand that this is the conversation that the person is having at the beginning of a war that we know is going to end. We know there's going to be a post-Reconstruction, which is going to make it okay. Doesn't make what is happening fine, doesn't make it fun, doesn't make the loss of life any less tragic or sad. But it does mean that it's not going to be forever, and it's not the apocalypse, it's not the end of civilization, it's not the end of everything we know it. This is a transition point, and the other end of the transition is going to be much better.
Okay. Randy, thank you so much for joining us and thank you for the uplifting note on the end. But I appreciate that so much. And what the message of, we have to be kind to each other and proceed through this and keep our spirits light as best we can. And Randy, how can people reach you? I know your website's looking fabulous these days.
Oh no, my website looks like shit.
Oh, I like it. Wow.
Oh, you like it? Okay.
It hasn't been touched in years by my web developer.
Wow.
And he and I actually aren't speaking anymore at the moment. So I have a new website that I haven't done anything with yet, but that's my plan to do it this week. I guess I can go ahead and give it out. It's covertspacecowboy.com.
Okay.
Covertspacecowboy.com.
Musical.
We tested that around the table, and so someone came up with that, and we were like, okay, let's.
I like it. I like it.
It's why not? I will be tinkering with that this week, and I will get some rudimentary something up there that functions. And I will just say, sadly, the sort of unfortunate ending that I had with my web guy was about someone who didn't want to put personal biases aside and decided to, label me because I wasn't on the same side he was, as all kinds of dirty, terrible things, which is, again, just sort of demonstrating what I'm talking about, people getting divided up into ways of thinking that I'm this, therefore you must be that. And it's very sad because I liked him plenty and thought he was a perfectly decent human being. And but if that's, the way that he wants to go with that, that's his choice. So I'll have something else up. I will say, I will promise that one way or another, the book is getting out soon. So there's been many delays personally in that process, but I promise it's coming soon. I got other stuff I got to work on, but it's also going to take a few minutes to do all the finishing touches and finalizing the negotiation with the publisher to make that all happen. So that's happening. New website's happening.
You're happening.
It's a crazy, crazy, crazy clusterfuck, but it's gonna be okay eventually.
Yes, it will.
We're gonna take that. We're gonna take that as the good news at the end.
Thank you, Randy.
I can come back and spend a whole time talking about the Reconstruction and the intergalactic economy. That's always a very fun topic, and
we will do that.
That sounds good.
Let's do something that will give people a place to put their consciousness, and let's do that sooner rather than later.
Happy to.
All right. Bless you, Randy. Thank you for everything that you do, and you stay safe. And as we always say, remember, we are not alone. Good night from Contact TV.
Bye now.
Bye now.
Thank you for watching Contact TV.
We would like to thank our generous sponsors, Lightwork Hypnosis, UFOria and the UFOria Chronicles, Earth Mystery News, Conspiracy Culture Books, MUFON Canada, Free Experiencers, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, and Variety Store Productions.
For guest booking information, please email Wes Roberts at producer@contacttv.ca. And don't forget to join us on Facebook and Twitter.